Hey everyone, it's Chris again. Today's live, we're going to be talking about a really interesting subject. There's nothing much more exciting than overloading your washer. Now, most people know that overloading your washer is not a good thing for the basic reason of your laundry just doesn't come as clean. But you also have to think about some other stuff, is how much more money are you spending by overloading your machine? Not something you always think about. The extra power that's being consumed, in some cases, the extra water. And if you think about the wear and tear that it's actually putting on your clothing, you're going to wind up having to replace clothing items far quicker than if you were doing your laundry without overloading the machine. So we're going to talk about the impacts of that, and then we're going to get into the other financial expense of overloading your machine, and that is the wear and tear on the mechanisms, the motors, the other parts that are in the machine that you're going to prematurely have to replace because the machine has had to work harder than it was designed for. So that's some of the stuff we're going to cover today. As well, we're here to answer any of your appliance questions regarding repairs or issues you're having with them. Just send them in and put them in the comments there, and we'll do our best to try and answer them for you. So today I've got two machines here. I've got a front load washer and I've got a top load washer. And just to talk about a little bit about what happens when we overload the machine, we basically wind up having the clothes, or I guess a better way to put it is, most of you already know that your clothes need to float in the water in order to move around and have the agitating action give the best effort in cleaning your clothes. And that's the same as to whether you're talking about a front load or a top load. If you jam too many clothes in that top load and they're not floating, they're just sitting in there, basically that agitator is running, and all it's doing is actually more or less vibrating your clothes. They're not being moved around. They're not being swirled in left and right directions. They're not being pulled down to the bottom and the stuff on the bottom pushed up to the top, which is what's supposed to happen in a top load. In your front load, your clothing is supposed to be able to be picked up from the bottom, brought up the side, and dropped from the top back into the water and detergent for cleaning. If you have that machine filled so full, you're not getting that pick up and drop action. You're really not doing anything other than tumbling your clothes in water as if they were in a dryer. So you're really not getting good cleaning from your machine. So the other thing you want to think about is what on these machines are going to be impacted by being overloaded. So you've got two things that starts to happen. One, you're working the machine harder than it should be. So now you're talking about drive components like motors, belts, motor couplings, clutches, things like that that tend to get a little bit expensive. The other thing you'll start to see is more out of balance problems. And on front load, that can really be tragic because you're talking about a machine that's in an out of balance state. When it's going into spin and it's trying to spin up to speed, it's usually somewhere around 800 to 1,000 RPMs. And when that starts to happen, this machine starts to rock. And it'll rock so bad, it'll start to actually move on your floor. So not only is it hard on the machine, you're causing an extra movement, vibration, and you may actually be starting to put marks on your flooring or tearing up the cushion floor if you have it in your laundry room. The other thing that'll happen is the drum will be moving around so violently when it's out of balance from an overload condition that your front door gasket or door boot, which is that seal between your tub and the front of your machine, these will actually tear or they'll twist and they'll stay like that. So now you've got a situation where there's a strain on this seal, and usually the next time you go to use it, it's going to split or crack open. And now you've got to have a fairly significant repair. It's not a terrible job, but unless you're doing it yourself, it can get to be somewhat expensive. Plus, you're going to have water leaking, and you've got electronic components down here in the base of your machine that are going to be subject to some moisture. You also have a set of shocks here on your front load that some machines have 2, some have 4, some have 3. But those shocks are going to be pushed to their limit when this machine is rocking out of balance from being overloaded. So they're going to prematurely wear out. They are a normal wearing part, but you're going to have to do it far more often than you should have to. Or the shock itself may break, or the shock may break away from the tub, and if it breaks the tub, well, now you're talking about the possibility of a new machine. So although it may be more convenient to get your load done quicker, you really need to make sure you're only putting in the amount of clothing items that it's designed for. And things like horse blankets and sleeping bags, you can put them in and the machine will run, but they either won't come clean or those things are going to definitely damage the machine. So top loads, a little bit different. Again, your clothes need to float, just like these are. If you have this machine so full of clothes that these articles can't move like that, they're not going to come clean. And that agitator, when it runs, and I'm just going to turn this guy on now. If you look at the speed that that agitator is going, and your clothes can't move, and they're not floating, they're going to be rubbing against each other. They're going to create a friction, and you're going to get a lot of lint, and you're going to get filling and piling on your material. Thus, basically wearing them out far sooner. But this also puts a huge strain on the machine. If that's not floating, it's being pressed against the tub, and you got an agitator. There's now a pressure on that agitator, and you're either going to strip the agitator where it mounts your transmission, or it's possibly even, I've seen it where it breaks a fin right off the agitator. The other thing that happens when you start to overload the machine, you'll find that the clothing is actually coming right up here to the tub ring. And I've seen a number of times where articles get caught in between the tub and the tub ring when it's agitating, and it cuts the clothing, and it tears up the tub ring till it gets really jagged and sharp, and it just starts to destroy your clothing. As well as small items like socks, these little guys will float to the top, and if your water level's too high because it's overloaded, this stuff's going to move itself in underneath this tub ring and get down between the two tubs. Now you've got a piece of clothing. Now you've got that sock you wondered where it went. It's now down in between the outer tub and that inner tub.
So you're saying the dryer isn't always the culprit?
The dryer isn't always the culprit. Now, the thing with the dryer is they usually slip out and land in the bottom, but in the washers, if they get down in between here, that thing is, first time that washer drains down, it's going to pull it down and it's going to suck it right into that pump. And now you either have a pump that's going to burn out for having this fabric in there, or it's going to plug up and you're going to wind up having a machine still full of water and you can't drain it out. So guideline is load it up with your clothing till it's over 3/4 full, and then add your detergent and your water. If you're loading your machine up to the point that it's jammed up right to the top, or you've got that nice little handy baseball bat that you're pushing down, trying to jam a few more articles in it, yes, you can get them in, but you're going to cause damage to the machine, and your clothes aren't going to be cleaned anyway. So you're more or less wasting your time and money. As well, with an overloaded machine like the front load, this has a suspension system, so this can float. Well, if you get an oversized load and it winds up getting out of balance, this is going to pull this thing in all different directions. And you'll know when it happens because you'll hear it banging on the inside of the cabinet. In some cases, it'll actually break off the water distributor. It will break some of the suspension springs. It'll also prematurely wear out the suspension pads. So simply by overloading a machine on a regular basis, you're going to wind up having to do more repairs, replace more parts than you should have based on the design of the machine. So we really recommend not to overload it. There's nothing worse than having some component fail and you wind up getting water leaking on your floor. And that can easily happen, especially with front load. So anyway, that's just some words of advice as far as overloading your machine. You really need to think about, is it worth it to throw those few extra items in instead of doing that second load? Yes, you may be using a bit more water and the electricity to do it, but you're just saving yourself the aggravation of having expensive repairs being done to your machines. Now, in most cases, if you're doing them yourself, well, that's that's not a bad thing. If you're able to do it, great. You can order the parts through a parts company like ourselves, and we can certainly get the part to you, and we've got lots of videos to show you how to change them. But you really don't want to be doing it over and over again. So again, try not to overload your laundry equipment.
How long should the springs and suspensions be lasting normally?
Well, normally in washers today, you would see life expectancy is around 10 years. So under normal use, those springs should be able to make it through, to 8, 9 years. But a machine that's being overworked and overloaded, you're going to see them within 5 or less having to be replaced. And on these top loads, they usually use a fairly powerful motor. And if that motor is being overworked over time, it's going to overheat and it's going to wind up needing replacement. So it's just for the extra load you may have to do by not overloading it, it's well worth the money. For what it costs to have somebody come in and service your machine, or what it's going to cost you for parts to rebuild and fix it because you've overloaded it, it's just far easier for you to do an extra load than to overwork the machine.
How about energy usage?
Well, energy usage, and I can't even talk now. Energy usage is a really great question because one, such as top load, if it's being overloaded, it's working harder, it's drawing more current, it's costing you more. Now, front load gets really interesting because what it does, it has the ability to sense the load in the machine. If you've ever noticed when you started your front load washer and it starts to fill and then it'll do a couple little tumbles one way and then the other way, it's actually sensing the load inside. Then it'll start to rotate a little bit. So it tries to figure out if it's balanced or not. So what'll happen, it'll fill with water, it'll start to do that. And if it senses it's too large a load or out of balance as a result of too large a load, this thing is going to slow itself down. It's going to turn it over that drum 2 or 3 times, basically trying to redistribute the clothing so it's not an out of balance. And then it'll start again. And it could do this continually until it knows that the load is balanced. If you've overloaded it, there's a very good chance it will never actually go through the cycle. It'll time itself out, and that machine really has done nothing but wet your clothes. Now, if you're there and you see it, that's great. But if you're not, and you just start the machine and you leave, this machine can actually fill up, continually try to redistribute the clothing, and then after a certain period of time, it's just going to shut itself off. So you'll come back, you'll open the door, your clothing will still be in there, it'll be sopping wet, and you'll wonder what's going on. And you'll call in a service person, and they won't find anything wrong with the machine, because typically the first test they do is without anything in it. So again, proper amount of clothing in your front load is really critical, and making sure that you don't have anything that's too heavy, such as a really large heavy blanket by itself. You need to put a couple articles in there to help balance it out. The other thing that'll sometimes happen with front load is if these get, so they're out of balance and shaking around too much, this is generally where your door lock switch is, and these will actually come ahead enough and hit those switches and break them. So, you get frustrated that your machine is broken, and, parts do fail over time, but when you realize that you're replacing parts because you really push the machine beyond what it was designed to do. And if you're wondering about how much you can put in your machines, your owner's manual has that information in it. So again, keeping in mind that this machine tries to spin at around 900 to 1,000 RPMs, that's fast. And if this is out of balance due to a oversized load, this thing is going to rock and roll and things will get damaged. I've seen these actually move around on the floor enough with an out of balance load that it's actually, if you're lucky, just pulls the cord out of the wall and it shuts down. But I've seen them actually pull the hoses right off the wall and the taps, and then you'll wind up in a flood situation. And nobody wants to be in that.
So overloaded is usually volume, not necessarily weight.
That's a good way to look at it. volume for sure, but that volume equates to weight. So you could put a weighted blanket, which may not be that big and may not take up the full load of the tub, but the amount of weight it's going to have, especially when it's wet, is going to be significant. And if it winds up in the machine and it's all off to one side, that's going to be hugely out of balance, and you're going to wind up with things starting to get banged and smashed. And if you've ever heard one of the machines when it's out of balance, it doesn't matter what end of the house you're in, you're going to hear it. It's going to go bang, 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 bang. And then you have to worry when it goes quiet. Did it smooth itself out, or did something break?
You could have an overstuffed washer, but a balanced overstuffed washer, you're just gonna end up with dirty clothes.
That's exactly right. You can have an overstuffed load that doesn't go completely out of balance, but your clothes are not coming clean. So if your goal is to have your clothes clean, those clothes need to float in a top load washer, and in a front load, they need to be able to be picked up and dropped back into the water over and over again in order to clean properly. Otherwise, all you're doing is just making them smell good by the time you take them out. It's, you know, the machine's finally shut off. You take it out, they're spun dry, that's wonderful, and you put them in your dryer, and that's all great, but you really haven't sanitized them or cleaned them very well. And you'll wind up having some of your clothing get premature wear because they've been put into a situation where they're rubbing against each other aggressively and hard. And yes, there's clothing or there's water in there, but fabric will rub against each other, especially cottons and golf shirts and even some cotton pants. They'll start to pill and wear thin. And again, now you're replacing clothing that you didn't have to as early as you should have. So that's just a little bit on overloading your washers, something to keep in mind. And again, we don't have a dryer here, but if we want to talk about doing laundry, if you've overloaded your washer, you may very well taking that same load and stuff it in your dryer, and you may very well be overworking your dryer as well. So again, proper amount of clothing in the machine with the proper sorting when it goes in, so it's not all off to one side, and you'll be away to the races. So just a few things to think about. I know numerous times I've done service calls where I've gone in and had this discussion with customers, and you know, I'll get a lot of pushback asking where I have the nerve to tell them how to load their washer. But when you explain it and you help them understand that you're there for a repair that could have been not have to take place because the machine was being overworked. So just some useful information that helps your clothing last longer, helps them come cleaner, and has your machines working longer, requiring less service, which turns out to be less expense for yourself.
We have a question from one of our Facebook. For recommendation.
And no matter how many different design changes they make, there is always going to be some moisture settling into there, and you'll start to see that grunge appearing, or even some mold. But yeah, vinegar works really good. Vinegar and water is fantastic. And you can even do a clean of your machine by, you can get some commercial products you can put into your washer and run it through a clean cycle so that you're without any detergent or any clothing, and that'll help pick up that residue and clean it. So vinegar works really well for that. You can also put in some orange crystals or some lemon juice or whatever as well. That little bit of acid will help remove some of that stuff and make it a little cleaner and fresher smelling.
If one of those boots was too far gone, like way too dirty, not responding to cleaning, what's the repair like? I mean, in terms of a rating, like, is it something fairly simple people can do?
It's a little intimidating the first time you think about doing it, but it's actually a repair that's not bad to do. You do wind up having to do some disassembly, You know, you got to take your top off, you have to take your front off, but it's just screws. And we have videos that show you how to do that on just about every machine. And there's a little wire spring that holds it to the front. But it's actually, you know, pretty easy to do. It's there's nothing you shouldn't be worried about doing it. Look for some videos that we have that'll show you step by step on how to do it, and you'll see it's a pretty easy repair all in all. And you also want to think about when you go to look for your part, make sure you're looking at a part that's an OEM replacement part. An OEM is basically means it's the same part that the manufacturer uses when they build the machine. It's got the quality to be back to having a machine with the same standards as when it was built. Some of the aftermarket stuff that's out there, this rubber is not as thick, it tears easier, and as well, it may be not as pliable. So you'll wind up just through normal use that rubber flexes enough time that it starts to split and crack. So make sure you go with a part that's an OEM. And if you're ordering from us, you're guaranteed that it's an OEM part because that's all we sell. We don't deal with aftermarket parts just because you can't be sure exactly if they're made to the standards that the manufacturer were designed for. So you can just wind up throwing good money after bad. But that's the most common thing you'll see on front load is that bit of grunge building up and a little bit of mold forming. And manufacturers done a lot of things like these guys have. They have water being injected in while it's washing to clean the glass bowl, but also to help flush the water out of this gasket or boot assembly. But even with that, you still have to do some cleaning. Some machines actually have a cycle now where it's a clean cycle, where it's just basically routinely rinsing water through the machine to help clean that out. And again, you can put some vinegar or some lemon juice or something there to give it a little acid to help clean it out. But it's the other thing you do, as soon as you're done doing your laundry, you've emptied your machine, you'll want to leave that door open a little bit so a little bit of air can get in. That makes a big difference on drying the machine out and not getting that mold forming. So the other thing you'll want to watch too, if you've had your machine being overloaded and you find now that it's getting a vibration and it's moving around a lot, you just want to make sure you level the machine back up. And on your leveling legs, there's a set of what we call lock nuts or jam nuts, and you'll just want to make sure that they're tightened up. That'll help keep the machine stable and in place.
Do you wanna maybe show transmissions and the parts and stuff?
Yeah, let's just talk about top load machine for just a little bit, because there's been a lot of changes. There's been a lot of changes in top load technology. So we used to see top load washers that had agitators. And this used to be, in my mind, one of the best agitators out there because it was a dual stage agitator. It had the ability that it would be moved by the transmission back and forth, moving your clothes around. But it also had this screw effect that would, one direction, the agitator would turn and the screw would stay in place. When it went to go the other way, the screw would rotate. And this is what would actually pull your clothes from the top, pull them down to the bottom, which then it would had to, in order to make room, it had to push the other clothes back up. So your clothes were constantly being circulated. Did the best job of giving you the cleanest clothes. The only downside to it is because it was in such constant contact with your clothing, it's going to wear it out a little sooner. So there's been some changes made in order to give more room inside your washer to start to compete with folks who don't like front load, they want a top load machine, but they want to have the same capacity of volume of clothes that a front load offers. So manufacturers started to move away from this style of agitator, and they went to this style. So when you open the lid of your machine and you look down in, this is all you see in the bottom. Now this is like a wave platform that they call it. There's a bunch of different names for it, but still it's the agitator. So what it's doing, it's in a machine now that's designed to rotate back and forth. So creates that agitator swirl. And then what they do is they actually have the tub turning at the same time while this is moving back and forth. And it's doing spray rinses on your clothes all the time. So it's taking that wash water and not just having them being agitated, but it's spraying them back on the clothes. So this is gentler on your clothes, less wear and tear on them, but it is a little bit difficult to get the washability that you do with the full-size agitator. So in these new machines, they're basically a front load that's been made to work as a top load. Same technology in motors and drive systems, which is good because they use less energy and they're very reliable, but you lose some washability with them. So now you're seeing manufacturers actually giving you this platform, but with a top piece that's attached that gives you sort of that old style agitator, which gives you better washability, but will start to use up a little bit of space inside that tub. So a lot of changes happened with laundry equipment over the years. The move to front load was the biggest, most dramatic change that we saw in doing laundry. Front loads were around actually many years before that, especially in the commercial industry. But once they were brought into the home, they've become more popular and more popular. But again, customers don't necessarily like the feature. They don't like that water being trapped. They don't like having to clean that food out or have to lean down and pull product in and out of it. So they prefer to have the top load version. So now you're seeing top loads being designed to use less water. This is a high capacity top load, and it uses a lot of water. That's a big tub of water. The versions that have this use much, much less. So better for the environment, less water, less detergent, less energy being used in order to do laundry. So we basically have front load technology being used in the top load setting. So on your front loads, when we're talking about normal wear and tear, these are a couple of different versions of the suspension shocks that you'll find underneath the front loads. And they're just like your car, they're a shock absorber. And that's what's inside. Not much by the look of it, but they do that job of providing that restriction to movement. So when this machine's working, these shocks are absorbing all the movement of the machine. That combined with a set of very strong springs at the top that hooks to the frame and hooks to your tub. And that's what you'll find at the top of these machines. Typically, there's just two. Some manufacturers will use four, but there's always a set of springs on the top that's keeping that in place and holding that tub up. And the tub on the bottom is supported by these shocks. So they work very well when you think you can take a load of clothes of about 20, 25 pounds and have them spinning somewhere close to 1,000 revolutions per minute. And these shocks and those springs are what's holding that tub assembly and keep it as vibration free as possible. But they will wear over time, and you do wind up having to replace them, and that's not a terrible job either. Again, you're either going to go from the back or from the front, or a combination of both. And there's just a plastic pin you pull out, and you're able to replace these shocks fairly easily. But they are normal wear parts, so you can expect to do that. It's not something you're going to do on a super regular basis. Again, this is another item that you want to make sure you're using an OEM part, because it's built to the standard that the manufacturer has built the machine on, and it's designed and to operate properly, but also to give you a good long load, a good long time of use, and be able to do a lot of loads of laundry. Some of the aftermarket stuff will look identical, and you won't really even be able to tell the difference when you pull it in or pull it out, but you'll find over time that these will wear out far sooner. The aftermarket ones will wear out far sooner than the OEM ones. So you might have saved a little bit of money in the purchase of the part, but you're going to wind up having to change it again sooner than the original ones lasted. So just word of advice, your shocks are normal wearing, you're going to wind up having to change them over time. But again, stick to OEM parts.
No more questions coming through right now. So
Okay. No, that's fine. The other thing we're going to talk about doing laundry, especially with washers, is the inlet hoses. You'll notice these are the flexible braided fill hoses. If you don't have these on your washer, I definitely recommend that you replace whatever you have with these. You probably, if you don't have these, you've got the rubber style, which we had for years and years and years. But over time, especially the hot water one, you'll find that they would have developed a bubble, and either on this end or the end where it connects to the machine, and that will burst, and you'll wind up with a flood and a lot of water damage. And in many, many places now, you're required by your insurance company to have this style of hose on your machine. And again, it just pretty well eliminates any possibility of having a significant leak and a lot of water damage. So a little bit more expensive than the rubber ones, but the best investment you can make for your home is buying the stainless steel braided hoses. And you get the same thing for your dishwashers as well, and for the fill line on your refrigerator if you have an ice maker. So something to keep in mind, just a really handy tip, and that can save you a whole lot of grief. And you don't have to worry about them kinking in behind when you don't have to move the machine and put it back. These don't kink off like the rubber ones do. Certainly worth the investment. So as far as your top load machine goes, you'll kind of look at this one. This one's a good machine to be able to see things. If you look, you'll see this dark line. That's actually, we used to call it scrud, but it's basically hair, dried detergent, dirt that winds up clinging to the top here, which is, as you can see, it's at the water line. And that's pretty typical to see. So this is a normal thing, and you can use, again, vinegar and water or some commercial product that you can run through your machine to do a clean cycle. But in some cases, this buildup can be so bad that those ways of doing it won't clean it, and you have to have the tub removed, which isn't a horrible job. We used to do it quite often. Again, cabinet comes off, tub ring comes off. We wind up removing that inner basket and having to clean it manually. And you'll know if it needs to be done, because when it gets bad enough, you'll start to get odor from your machine. You'll come into your laundry room or laundry area, open the top lid, and you'll find that there's a very unpleasant odor. If that's the case, then we're going to need to clean that for you. So again, with top load, doesn't hurt every now and then just to run your hand around the top edge of the tub ring. This should be nice and smooth. Now this one here, I can feel with my fingers a little bit of rough spot, especially right here. So that means if there's any clothing that floats up against this, it's going to be caught, and it's going to pull the threads, and it's going to wear that clothing out. So if you have signs on your tub ring where it's not smooth, it's actually rough, that tells you you're overloading your machine. That's one of the quickest, easiest ways to find out if, especially if you have other people in the home that are doing laundry besides yourself. You may not overload the machine, but it's hard to say what somebody else is doing. So if you're running your hand around that and that's rough, that machine has been overloaded on a semi-regular basis. So quick, easy check.
do you have a model specific question? I'm just asking if Frigidaire Max Fill washers are any good.
The Frigidaire Max Fill is a nice washer. Honestly, from a service technician's perspective, it's hard to pick one machine style over another. It really comes down to same as buying a car. Some people like Ford, some like GMs, some prefer Hondas or Toyotas. Appliances are pretty much the same. There's brands that you've had good success with, maybe some other brands on a certain type of appliance that you didn't have the best reliability with, that kind of taints your feeling towards it. But really it comes down to getting the machine that works best for your application, your needs, your demand by the size of your family, and what you needed to do, what you wanted to do. And you may like all the bells and whistles. You may like to have connectivity so you can see how your machine's doing just by looking at your phone, or you may just like the basics. You don't need all the fancy buttons and dials and bells and whistles. So it really comes up to what you like to have, but Frigidaire has always made a very strong machine, and I have nothing that I would say bad against the Frigidaire compared to any other make out there. So there is a lot of selection out there for laundry equipment. Again, choices between front load, top load, top load with an agitator, top load with just a wash plate. And now you're starting to see a real push towards the one-piece unit of washer and dryer. That was one of the nice things when front loads came out, because you could stack the natural dryer on top of it, which gave you much more space in your laundry area, actually, and some convenience of pulling your clothing out of the washer and just popping them into the dryer. So stacking units are pretty cool. So you see, when front load came out, you see a lot more people stacking their dryers on top of their washers, which is actually a real space saver. Sometimes from the service point of view, it's not always the nicest situation, because in some cases, as you can see, there's components here that the top has to come off the washer. So if there was a dryer on top here, it would have to come off. So that just adds a little bit of aggravation to the situation. But now you're starting to see more and more of the manufacturers building one-piece unit, a washer and dryer on top, and they're great space savers, and they certainly have all the same technology built in, so you're saving on water, you're saving on power, and you're getting good washability. And they're great, especially for small space. You can basically tuck them into the area of a small closet. So that saves a lot of room. You're starting to see them become really popular in apartment buildings. But for yourself as a homeowner, the only thing I will mention that I've found that over time, typically the homeowner will go through 2 washers for every dryer. And if that's the case where you have a one-piece unit, you may have a washer that's the repair bill is fairly high in order to have it repaired. But if you choose not to, now you have to go and purchase either another stack unit, which are expensive, or look at having to buy a washer and dryer together. So it's just something to keep in mind with the one-piece units, that you will eventually require service of normal wear and tear items, and that as a one-piece unit, they're married together. So if one becomes too costly to fix, you're having to dispose of the other half of the machine as well.
The one last question we can wrap up with here.
Okay.
And this viewer from YouTube is wondering your opinion on the best washer ever made.
Ooh, my opinion, best washer ever made. And this is from a service technician's point of view. And that would be this little guy that we were talking about for the top load. This is the Whirlpool built, and you'd find it under many different names, but we refer to it as the direct drive. It doesn't have a belt, it's got a motor coupler. And the reason we like it is, one, it's got great reliability, and there was no other washer out there that was easy to service as these are. So from a guy who's got a fixer's point of view, this was the best machine that was ever built. Now, in today's world where water consumption is an issue, power consumption is an issue, this isn't the best choice anymore. Yes, it's easy to work on, but it, again, is not the most environment-friendly machine that's out there. So, but yeah, my own personal opinion as to which washer I like best, it's these top load direct drive washers.
They say that's a solid pick. They have a Kenmore 80 series. I love it.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I've had that same machine, and it's terrible to think about, and maybe it's not so much on the lazy side. It's just what's makes it easier for your day in trying to do service calls. If you walk into the house and you found one of these, it was kind of like, okay, that's great. I know I can get this fixed in a fairly reasonable span of time, and they weren't incredibly expensive to repair. So if you've got one of these and it's still going, keep it for as long as you can. But otherwise, you're going to be looking at some newer technology. So there may be some things you don't like about the newer technology, but you're certainly going to be saving on water, power, and you're still going to have good washability. Okay. Well, that's all the time we have today, folks. Thanks very much for tuning in. Hope this little bit of information with overloading your laundry equipment kind of sits well with you and gives you some pause to think about, what am I doing to my machine? And maybe I'm actually going to wind up hurting it to the point it's going to cost me more money. So just some general information I wanted to share. So have a great day. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about snow blowers.
There you go.